Hello everyone. It's wonderful to have Paul Greengrass here. I'm going to say a little bit about him, and the first time I saw him, he came into the Slade to meet a friend of mine sitting over there, Peter Cannon, who was in my year, and he came in for a Christmas party, and it was in the 70s, and what's quite interesting was a food fight developed, and Paul was very good at throwing food across the room. Do you remember?
I do.
Yeah. Very, very good.
Bill Coldstream was there, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. I think you managed to...
I think we got him.
Yeah, and it was fantastic.
Or Sir Bill, sorry, you should say.
I mean, another connection I have with Paul is his wonderful sister, Sarah, Sarah Greengrass, who was a really interesting painter, and also basically ran Acme, ran the spaces that people got. Acme is the studio for young or for artists. Lots of artists were in the block then. And she was absolutely fantastic and so kind, but also a very good painter. And really sadly, she passed away very young, about 15 years ago. So I'd also like to say, it's so great to see Paul here again. I'm going to say something a little bit about, you all know a lot about him, I'm sure. He is a film director, film producer, screenwriter, former journalist. He specializes in dramatizations of real-life events and is known for his signature use of handheld cameras. His early film, Bloody Sunday, won the Golden Bear at 52nd at Berlin International Film Festival. Other films he's directed include 3 in the Bourne action thriller series, and we're going to see a clip from one in a minute, The Bourne Supremacy, The Bourne Ultimatum, and Jason Bourne, the most recent one. He did United 93 in 2006, which he won the BAFTA Award for the Best Director, and he received an Academy Award for the Best Director nomination for Green Zone 2010 and Captain Phillips 2013. In 2004, he co-wrote and produced the film Omar, which won the British Academy Television Award. The other thing was he was the ghostwriter for Spycatcher, the very key document that was discussing British intelligence service. So in a funny way, there is a big link to the films. I'm just going to show you one clip that I really like before we start asking him questions, because it's so full of positive energy, and I hope this works. And if not, I'll ask James to come over. Here we go. I'm going to get this over. Where is the play button, James? Sorry? Can you come? Sorry?
Spacebar?
Oh, spacebar. It's not coming up on. Sorry, could you come? Show me. Sorry. Excuse me. I have a Mac computer, I'm not so... Oh, this? Oh. But this is the whole thing. We wanted just the section. Okay. I thought we wanted to go for this. Is this the whole bit?
Hello, Lady.
Maybe you're still looking for me.
Can we turn the lights down a bit?
Bourne.
What do you want?
Can we make it bigger?
I wanted to thank you for the tape. God, we need it. It's all tied off. It's over. I guess I owe you an apology.
Is that official?
No, off the record. You know how it is.
Goodbye.
Wait. David Wynn. That's your real name. You were born 4/15/71 in New Jackson, Missouri. Where did you get in? We'll talk about it.
Get some rest, man. You get tired.
Amazing, that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a lot of questions here.
Okay. Do your worst.
First question. How did you become a film director? You didn't go to film school, we think, in brackets.
No, I did not.
In answering this question, we hope that you might have advice for those who want to follow in your footsteps today.
No, I didn't go to film school. Well, I think that it's interesting. Now I'm a bit older, I do think quite a bit about the answer to that question. Why do film directors become directors? Because it's something that lots of people want to do, but only few kind of come through. The short answer is a lot of it's to do with luck. I think that a lot of it is, and I'm talking about movies particularly, I think a lot of it is perhaps to do with the intensity of your childhood experiences, I think. I definitely believe that. That's when I read kind of, memoirs of directors, David Lean, Scorsese, Spielberg, whatever. There's a sort of, I'm struck by the similarities in the childhood that there are sort of periods of despair and loneliness, and somewhere the cinema, the experience of going to the cinema acts at a time when you're quite emotionally vulnerable as a child. That certainly was my case, and I think that you end up then with a sense of the cinema as a place of wonder and a place of safety and a place of intoxication, and so when you move through life, when you end up making films, you're engaged at an emotional level in trying to recreate intense experiences you had as a child that you perhaps weren't aware of at the time. And certainly I wasn't aware when I was younger, but now I'm older, you look back and you go, oh, I see, so that was the root of it. And so I think that's the sort of psychobabble version of it. I think that I was very lucky to work at Granada when I left university. I mean, I wanted to come to the Slade originally when Pete came. I would say Pete and I made films at school together. That was a very important thing. I was on a film council committee a few years back where we tried to find out what these common threads are. That's certainly also an element to it. If you have access at school to filmmaking at some level, the craft of it, that definitely is a high determinant factor, and it's one of the reasons why at schools we've got to get in there and get people more active at that level. And then I went to Granada, and that was a much better than any film school could ever be. It was my film school, and the lessons that I learnt there have always stayed with me, and the people who taught me, and it was a rough school in many ways, but it taught me about the world and World in Action, which no longer is with us, but was then a program that was a very popular program, but a very political program and a very film literate program. The phrase World in Action was bought by Sidney Bernstein, who was the great champagne socialist who founded Granada. He bought it from John Grierson, who was the father, really, of the British documentary tradition. The phrase "world in action" was an advised phrase. It meant fixing on film the world in action. Can you do that? How do you do it? What are the techniques by which you do it? And those were deeply in the DNA of Granada and were passed on to me, and everything I've done, whether it's these more commercial pieces or less so, they're always, I think, marked by that ethos. So that's the short answer.
I mean, you went to Cambridge, and then I remember with Peter Cannon, you wrote lots of letters to television, is that correct?
I did. When I graduated, I wrote lots of letters.
Like
none of which,
100 or
none of them got answered, of course. Well, in fact, it used to be quite funny because you'd get replies. Yeah, you'd write to dear Mr. Scratchit, I'd really like to come and work in your absolutely ghastly programme in Channel Islands Television, and you'd get a reply from the sort of third assistant to the third assistant, dismissing you. And
but you both went into television at that point. So it worked.
Persistence is always now we get to the advice part. The advice part's really quite simple. You have to be honest with yourself about whether you really want to do it. I think you have to be honest with yourself because the industry will find you out immediately about whether you are prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to do it, and they're great. It's a hard work industry, and you can get in but you can't stay in unless you're willing to give it your life, and that's true of a lot of creative professions, but it's certainly true of filmmaking. And you have to pay your dues, in my view, unless you're Michelangelo, it's the same as painting.
Sure.
You've got to learn the craft, and you've got to challenge yourself, and you've got to find your voice, and that takes time. It takes time. It takes practice.
Actually, that brings me to another question. What painters and photographers' movies? If I remember, Battle of Algiers influenced you?
Very much
right?
so. Yeah.
When you were starting out, what were the big influences?
Film-wise?
Yes. Film or art or anything?
Well, I would say that I was very influenced by David Lean when I was a small kid, because it had a particular... my dad, who was in the Merchant Navy, so he wasn't around much when I was a kid, but when he came back, he'd be away for a year or something, and then he'd come back for a short period of time, and he was a strange man. He had left school at 14, but he was entirely self-educated, and he had a sort of profound view that cultural activity mattered, and that meant Shakespeare, Wagner, and the films of David Lean. And so we would always end up going up to the West End, to the Odeon. I'd have been 7, 8, 9, 10, and he'd always take us to the David Lean movies, and they were very profound experiences to me. And I can see now in some of my films that Lean is there, as it is, of course, for a lot of directors there. Later, when we were at school, Pete and I, there was a very vigorous film club, and I was quite young. I think that's also very important if you want to make films, being exposed to the old masters. It's the same in movies as it is in painting. They're called the old masters because they're the best guys, and women, obviously. And they invented the language, and they explored the medium, and they wrote the Bibles, and there is nothing that guides you down the road towards your own voice, whether it's in painting or filmmaking or anything else for that matter, than the study the early experience of the old masters and their consistent study. And so, you know, Battle of Algiers, Costa Gavros, Buddha Souffle, you know, you name them. Those were films that I watched and loved when I was very, you know, probably 16, 17. Funnily enough, Hollywood movies I didn't really start getting into them until later when I went to college. That was more where that came from. So I was more European cinema first.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting is that I mean, your work with, okay, I mean, how has your experience as an investigative journalist and your interest in espionage and Northern Ireland informed and shaped your filmmaking and your work with Spycatcher and Peter Wright? I mean, that was extraordinary experience. Can you say something about that?
Well,
and for those that don't know, it was a massive, it became a court case, this book that exposed, that was accusing the head of the British Secret Service of being a Russian spy. It
was a fairly ludicrous book, let's be honest.
Was it? But well, half of them are 5 were Russian spies. Philby, they worked next door to us.
That's right. Yeah, no, he
just here. Was now the Wellcome Institute. That was MI5.
Right. That was, yeah.
And they had a secret entrance through Euston Square. You saw these strange people entering down on the platform.
Euston Square tube station.
Where are they going?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, they were interesting times, weren't they? The 70s and 80s. There was a lot of.
So, what was your kind of experience writing that with?
Well, it emerged out of working on World in Action, which was a very interesting place to be. It was a very eclectic place. It was a team based television program, so there was 30 or 40 of you, very young. We were all very young. It was sadly and disgracefully very male, as television, not exclusively but pronouncedly as television was in those days, late 70s. Was a sort of strange mixture of agit-prop politics, pure filmmaking in the traditions of Grierson and Jennings, and that was a very important. The journalist and a graft on of journalism. So I was never really investigative journalism. I just was on that program, and I was interested in filmmaking, but I was interested in filmmaking about information. And oddly, a friend of Pete and mine, who we went to school with, Adam Curtis, came from the same place, and I can see in his work strange refractions of the same thing. How do you marry an approach to the world, facts, images, filmmaking, and a sort of journalistic edge, an old-fashioned journalistic edge, into how do you bring those elements into synthesis? And World in Action was one of those places where they existed in an interesting way, and you were allowed to tremendous amounts of freedom. And it was at a time when Margaret Thatcher had come to power, so tremendous amount of time was spent plotting the revolution, obviously, with pretty non-existent results, but it was all good fun,
I think it might be nice to show a clip from Bloody Sunday, actually.
Okay.
At this point. If I can do it this time. I think I can.
How's it so far, all right? Are we talking about the right things?
Bloody Sunday is filmed in a documentary style, and it underlines the authenticity of this sad event with the absence of music. Can you describe how it contributed to the controversy, potentially emotionally loaded on both sides, and what reactions you got from both sides?
Well, I first went to Northern Ireland in 1979-80. When I was a young man, I was just out of university. I just started at Grenada, and I went to cover the hunger strikes. And I decided to make a film about a young man called Raymond McCartney, who was exactly my age, and he'd grown up in Derry, and he was serving, I can't remember, 25 years or something like that. He'd shot 2 or 3 people in Derry, including a businessman called Geoffrey Agate, and they'd been particularly graphic murders. His speciality was to come up and shoot people through the quarter light of a car. And he was one of the first people to go on hunger strike. And so the question for me was, here was this young man who had apparently had exactly the same upbringing that I had had, not that many, couple of 100 miles from where I'd grown up, so not thousands of miles, had, by all accounts, watched the same football matches that I'd watched as a kid, you know, got interested in girls at the same time, had all the same experiences. Then suddenly, at about the age of 17, his life had veered off on this journey towards the provisionals and ultimately to becoming involved in the armed struggle, and ultimately to the Maze prison, the dirty protest and the hunger strike. Why? What was the factors? That was really what the film was about. And that began for me a sort of deep interest in the problems of the Troubles, and I made quite a number of films at World in Action about that. I spent a lot of time there. It was a big part of my life. What was interesting about Raymond McCartney was that his cousin was one of the first people killed in Bloody Sunday. In fact, just as that shot, not that guy, that's Duddy, but very quickly after that you see his cousin killed. It was the determinant factor for so much of what followed. It was the moment, as the writer Eamon McCann said, it was the moment at which the Troubles became unavoidable. It couldn't be stopped once you'd had Bloody Sunday. It was going to be a generation of bloodshed. So I had always wanted to make a film about it. It wasn't until much, much later, late 90s, when I'd made a film about the Stephen Lawrence case, and that had gone down very well, that I felt I had the position and the authority to be able to make that film and the experience to make that film. But it was at a very different context. Peace was being painstakingly built. All the parties to the conflict were engaged. But of course, if you've had a conflict, what goes very quickly is a sense of shared history. And so it seemed to me that what needed to happen was to make a film. And any film, and it's very like, I'm sure, I keep referencing painting only because, you know what I mean, we were there once, the three of us. Well, you're still there, but you with any piece of work, you have to set out what it is you're trying to achieve in your mind. Conceptually, you've got to have a what it is you're trying to say, or what it is you're trying to explore. Now, that's not the same as deciding what it is you're saying, but you've got to have a problem that you want to which you don't know the answer, and the film or the painting or the novel becomes the answer, becomes the journey in search of the answer. The problem of that film was how, when you have this event that was at that time viewed so differently depending on where in these islands that you lived. If you lived in the city of Derry in the Bogside or the Creggan, you would have one very clear view because you were either there or your family members were there or your next door neighbour was there. If you grew up on the waterside, you'd have a very different view. If you grew up in the Republic, you'd have a different view. If you grew up, obviously, in the UK, you'd have a different view. Well, not the UK, in Britain.
Can I ask you, do you agree with Adam Curtis that in the West, most bad things and bad systems and bad governments and institutions are the result of well-meaning theories or radical liberal ideas about freedom, fatally turning out to produce manipulation or lack of freedom?
I don't think I would. I love Adam, but I think sometimes his sloganising gets the better of him. I think that feels a bit... I mean, I get what he means in one sense, but as a one-purpose view of the world, no. I don't think that's the way the world...
Fair enough. That was a question from undergraduate fine art media.
What, from somebody here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, no, all these questions are coming from different people.
Ah, I see, from people. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, one or two
Did the person who walked out, did I not answer a question?
No, I think they're going to a PhD seminar.
Oh, right.
Okay. Sure, they don't. Okay. Following another question, quite interesting one. Following Trump's recent comments, what do you think about torture in films?
I mean, the depiction of torture in films?
Yes. And you know his recent comments, I'm sure.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
I do. Well, I think that I would say in my films I'm not particularly graphic. In other words, I don't believe in blood and gore, and I think given some of the subject matters that I've covered, they're pretty restrained in that. I'm much more interested in the what I'd call the ballet of brutality, or the steps by which violence engulfs us, and that certainly is at the core of Bloody Sunday. It's also at the core of United 93. That seems to be much more important to understand that than the mechanics of whether you stab someone, how much blood comes out. That's less interesting to me. So the answer on torture is it's of course important to depict what goes on in the world in a pitiless way, but it's more important to understand why and how it arises and what it does than it is to graphically depict its gore, I would say.
Yes, I agree. This brings me to another question, slightly related. The geopolitical world seems to be in turmoil. Poverty, race, migration, nationalism are troubling dynamics. Mm-hmm. Trump appears to be a catalyst for uncertain change, revolt, for better or worse. What duty does an artist or filmmaker have to reflect, inquire, reveal the real world, current affairs? And actually, in a way, that question relates, how, in the Bourne series, how close to that is it in real life? Are there people like Bourne out there? Maybe,
not really.
Maybe with a gun, waiting
We
for
did think
Trump
of
to
casting
appear.
you, actually.
Sorry?
We did think of casting you. No, but listen, Jason Bourne is fun and it's an entertainment. I think it's interesting in that it's a, films in the mainstream tend to be order reinforcing in their ethos. Gotham City is in turmoil. We need Batman to restore order. That's a sort of classic trope of mainstream cinema. I think what's interesting about, or interested me when I went to make those movies, was that Bourne is different. Bourne is unlike James Bond, for instance. Same thing. James Bond is order reinforcing. Bourne is viewing a corrupt world and trying to find out why they're lying, who's behind it. And that's makes him a much more interesting character to me. But he is clearly in the mainstream of commercial cinema, for sure. What was the bit about Trump? Is he a reaction to What was the formulation about Trump? He's clearly a dick, obviously, but that goes without saying. But
yes, the geopolitical world seems to be in turmoil. Poverty, race, migration, etc. are troubling dynamics. Trump appears to be a catalyst for uncertain change. What duty does an artist or filmmaker have to reflect, inquire, reveal the real world, current affairs?
Well, I would say that anyone, be they writer, painter, filmmaker or whatever, your responsibility is to tell the truth as you see it in the arena that you feel comfortable. Now, not everyone is going to feel comfortable with the unfolding texture of the world as we see it. Some will, some won't, but it doesn't make them less truthful, you know. The essence is to tell the truth and to be obsessive and pitiless and in search of the craft that you need to tell the truth. Some people, including myself, are interested in the way the world works, in the world in action. That's where I started, and that's where I've stayed. How it is always in flux, how there is always a relationship between those who have the power and those who don't, and there's always conflict there. I would say that that's my theme, and that's what I stick to, whether it's expressed in a commercial context or in a less commercial context. Sure. That's the golden thread for me. I would say to the questioner that I wouldn't say that the problem of instability is caused by poverty so much as gathering wealth in the formerly poorer parts of the world. I would say that's what's causing the instability, because it's our desire in the wealthier parts of the world to hang on to our gap in wealth that's causing Trump and Brexit.
Sure.
So, you know, we're frightened of losing our wealth. That's what's driving.
To sort of move away from that kind of theme, I'm interested in, there's quite a few questions quite specific about filmmaking. Mm-hmm. You use combinations of actors and ordinary people, non-actors, to great effect. Mm-hmm. How do you manage that? And how do you manage a production team behind the camera editor, writing, dealing with execs who want to profit on their investment? How do you balance that?
Well, on the actors thing, the short answer is if you blend the two, you know, Loach has done it in all his films, many people have done it. I mean, obviously Costa Gavros did it, you know, there's a long tradition of bringing reality and fiction into collision and synthesis, if you can. And what in short happens is, if you're lucky and if you can hold the ring in the right way, the professional actors stop acting and the non-professional performers start acting, and if you get it right, they meet in the middle, and it gives a texture and a tone to the performances that gives it a grit and a rawness. So that's the answer to that.
And I mean, how do you react when you come across? We're sort of relating, really. How do you react when you come across a difficult actor or actress?
Well, I've been lucky. I've only come across it a couple of times. I think that the answer is, with experience, you get to know how to handle. By the way, it's nothing to do with actors. It's a difficult person in a workplace situation, and that person can be, you know, somebody down the hall, or it can be somebody behind a camera, it can be somebody on a set acting. It's nothing to do with.
Have you ever felt any time in your life that you were in the wrong industry?
No, never.
That's another question here.
No, never. No.
That's great.
I loved it from the moment, and I mean, it's a harsh mistress, you know. You give your life to it.
Yeah. Have you ever started a film and not finished it?
Never.
Never. Great.
I've started writing screenplays and not made them.
And what's your next project?
I'm doing a film about Eliot Ness. And it's quite an interesting thing. Eliot Ness was depicted in, and probably some of you may have seen the movie The Untouchables, which was quite a good movie. which was about Eliot Ness catching Al Capone in the sort of end of the Roaring Twenties. This is not about that. This is about what happened to Eliot Ness quite some years later in the middle of the Depression, when he ended up in Cleveland, Ohio, at a time when the cities of North America were divided cities, rather like our cities today, in the sense that you had the cities and then you had these vast migrant shanty towns, sort of chalets around the cities, which were the people displaced by the Depression and the Dust Bowl. And he came to town to try to alleviate. He was quite an interesting man, Eliot Ness. He actually was much more complex than the one-dimensional portrait in the Untouchable. He was interested in alleviating the problems of a divided world, and he came upon somebody who was killing migrants, chopping them up and leaving them in the street, and that's really what the story's about, what he uncovers on that.
Shall we see another clip? I think it'd be great.
Whatever. I didn't answer how you manage a team, but we can do that later, can't we? Hide.
United 93. What? Oops.
You need a bit of volume, Andy, don't you?
Sorry?
Need a bit of volume, don't you?
What's it like to have others film your work, to work with cinema photographers? We're interested too in how complex action scenes are filmed. For instance, how are some of the fight scenes using lots of close-ups in the Bourne film shot? Are they planned?
They are, yeah. I mean, obviously, the making of the images is at the heart of filmmaking, and the control of the image and the ability to render the image that you want is at the heart of it. And to do that, you have to have a point of view. It's at the heart of all creative activity. Point of view is what it's all about. You know, lots of people can shoot a scene, lots of people can paint a picture, but it's what is your point of view? What are you trying to convey by depicting this or that scene? And to do that, you have to bring into synthesis all the elements that go to create a cinematic sequence, and those are the image collection, the performance, the sound are just as important, and you have to plan that and have an idea in your mind of how you want it to go. And when I sit down to start to make a film and I'm writing it, I'm seeing in my mind the whole piece. It's not about the words. The words are almost the least important in a way. It's about the builds and the musicality of it and the textures, and when you want it to when you want to let the threads of the reins of a sequence go, and when you want to pull them in, what are the details that are going to be most telling. So if you take a fight is essentially a dance. It's what it is. It's a dance, and you begin with the most important question of all in any action sequence, which is, what is it that you're trying to convey through action that bears on character? Because if you're not answering that question, then you will not have an action sequence that will mean anything.
I mean, do you ever, I mean, this is my question, do you ever, like, intuitively adapt what's happening? So, like, go off script? Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so something happens that's more amazing than you thought, or... I mean, actually, there's a similar question to that.
The script is not the journey, the script is the map.
It says here, this question actually is very similar. I mean, that really interests me, how intuitive you can be in a situation. It says, can you talk about situations where you abandoned the script and went with a cinematic moment, or any situation ridiculed by chaos and havoc that turned out to be something great, and vice versa?
Well,
if you give us an example, it would be great fun.
Okay,
actually.
well, I can give you... I want to talk a little bit about the conceptual element, and then I'll talk to some examples. Filmmaking, what you're trying to do is to bring into balance two forces that are inherently in opposition to each other. And those two forces are the force of order and planning, and the other force is the force of anarchy and the found moment. And if you, for me, all filmmakers are different. For me, if you have too much of one and not enough of the other, you're going to have either a dead, lifeless fish on a slab type sequence, or you're going to have chaos, right? There's a book by a man called Richard Williams, who's a very brilliant writer. He mainly writes about music and about motor racing, sports journalist. He wrote a very small book about Ayrton Senna, the racing driver. And he talked about Ayrton Senna being the poet of the racetrack, because the racing driver has to find the most intense, profound meeting of those two forces, because a racing car is never driven in a normal way. A racing car literally floats around a track at the place where the car adheres to the track but is actually losing control. And if you can find that zone, it's actually a liquid zone. It's not just one place, it's a whole universe, and you get round. The great drivers can do that. And I thought that's a brilliant, actually, insight into what filmmaking really is. You're trying to find that place where the thing moves of its own accord, and you can steer and brake and dive and climb almost weightlessly and gather pace and lose pace without the thing feeling like it's yawing and slipping out of control. So you have precision and velocity, and it is immense amounts of planning. It's also immense amounts of good fortune to work with great people, but you have to be prepared to find the moment. I mean, the best example I can give was when I made a film, Captain Phillips, which was about Tom Hanks played a guy who was kidnapped by pirates off the coast of Somalia. And we had a scene that I'd written which was about after it was all over and he'd been rescued and everybody had been killed and he'd been through this dreadful ordeal, and what did it mean, but yet he'd had a real formed a relationship with this other captain, this young kid, you know, who had nothing, who'd come onto the ship. And he was shown, he was cleaned up, and he was shown into actually the Navy captain's cabin, given a phone, and you know the TV was on saying that he'd been freed and so on and so forth. And the scene was about the enormity of what the experience had meant to him and how he broke down. And we had a day to shoot it, and we were leaving the ship that night, and we shot it every which way. You know, we tried it standing up, we tried it sitting down, we tried it sitting on the captain's bed, we tried it sitting in the captain's desk, and it never felt like stones in a bucket. It didn't adhere, it had no truth to it. It was nothing to do with what Tom was doing. He's a brilliant, brilliant actor. Just, there was something about it that wasn't right. And there are moments in any piece of work where you realise that the stakes are the whole film. Because if that moment doesn't work, you've gone on a journey and not got the resolution that you're looking for, which has got to be emotional. So in the end, in desperation somewhat, I asked the captain of the Navy, of the ship, the Throxton, where he would have been taken when he first came off the lifeboat, when he was first brought onto the ship. He said he would have been taken to the medical bay. And by now, we had about an hour to go, and I said, could we go and film in the medical bay? And he said yes. So I said to Tom, last throw of the dice, let's go down and let's do a different moment. In other words, we've been exploring the moment after he's been cleaned up, thinking that the drama of the piece and the truthful moment was as he regains, you know, he's got his phone, he's home. And instead we did the other moment, and we shot it in about 15 minutes. It was all hands to the wheel, and we improvised it, and we used the medic who was on duty, young woman who was the medic. And the first take, everything went wrong. Barry and I got crabbed in the camera sort of at home. We cut, and she dried. This young woman dried when Tom Hanks sort of walked up to her. But you could feel straight away that there was a rawness. There was something was happening. It's an electricity. It's something, you know, it's there. And because he's a superlative actor. There's moments with actors, and there's moments when you make films when, a little bit like sport, you can set the scene, but only the actor can walk through that door and seize that moment and do it. And the next take was the take we used, when you just go, that is that moment, he's got it, that's it.
That's amazing. Actually, I was just going to ask you, I don't know what's happened there. How interesting. I was going to ask you about Captain Phillips. Okay, I've got this question. Staying on the topic of authenticity based on inspired by real events, Captain Phillips is another amazing example of how to bridge the gap between action thriller cinema and current issues. Was the casting of haggard and bony Somali pirates deliberate to separate them from the usual soulless foreign action cannon fodder we usually experience in Hollywood action flicks? Was the intention of humanizing the Somali pirates that the audience should understand their drivers and fall into a conflict of emotions? You want Captain Phillips to survive, but also worry fatality on the pirate side.
Yeah, yeah. The answer is yes. It was quite interesting. That film, there was a script that Sony had that they sent to me a few times, and it read to me like a Steven Seagal movie. And it was really the story of this guy and how they saved him and his wife at home, and it all ended with her in a prayer circle, and they were all holding hands praying for his release as the Navy SEALs went in and rescued him. And it was the film that whoever's asked that question is talking about. And it's a big misunderstanding to think that Hollywood is filled with people who only want to make shit movies. That's just, if you think that, think again. First of all, think about what you yourself watch, because I bet most of you here watch mostly Hollywood product. Not all, but I bet most of you, if you're honest, do. There are lots of good movies made in Hollywood as well as obviously a fair amount of shite films. It's filled with smart people who are trying to solve a problem, which is how do you create global entertainment product. That's the mission. It's not subsidised. They've got to find ways of selling tickets. But within that system, for the last 100 years, lots and lots of great films have been made, and there's lots and lots of space to be made. So here's an example of that. So Sony said, and I turned this film down a few times. Anyway, finally they said, would I come in and see? The studio was then being run by a woman called Amy Pascal, who's a very, very wonderful person in Hollywood now, great supporter of good work and directors. And she had a production there, and we had I said, I can't make that film. The film that I would make would be a very different film. It would be a film about two captains, one from our world and one from Somalia. And this kid watches the wealth of the world float past his door. He's got nothing else. It's like being in the Lower East Side in Manhattan in 1890. There's the church or there's crime. That's it. What do you choose? And they're going to go on they're going to collide in this encounter on the high seas, and it's going to be a small fragment that bears on globalization, what globalization is doing, the wealth of the world and those that are excluded from it, and what happens when somebody tries to have a piece of it for themselves. And that film will be, at least half of it will be foreign language, because I want the film to be as much about that young kid and his friends as it will be about Tom Hanks and what happened. And out of that, I want that to feel that in the end, you don't demonize anybody. You understand. And some critics didn't like this. You understand what those Navy SEAL guys are doing. If I was kidnapped and any of you were kidnapped, you'd want the Navy SEALs to rescue you. They're only doing their job. They're not there in some cold-hearted way. That's how it works. That's what globalization is doing. It's bringing all these forces to bear. And I want us to feel compassion for everybody in that situation. And if we can do that, you'll be left with complex feelings, but also have had an intense cinematic experience that will justify the price of the ticket. So that was the mission. And so I pitched that, and I said, so that's the only film I'm interested in making. And they said, great, let's do it. And they did it, and they never questioned it, and they were wonderful supporters of the film. Now, I'm lucky because when I make films, I make them in conditions of extraordinary creative freedom, and I always have, actually. They've always been very good to me, and I make exactly the films that I want to make in exactly the way that I want to. Why were they so happy to do that? One of the reasons is because we're in a more pluralistic world. There are films that are made that are rah-rah American Steven Seagal movies that play to the nostalgia for a clearer world, for a unipolar world, and those are the forces that elected Donald Trump. But at the same time, there are also deep forces that are opening the world up, that are making it no longer unipolar. And cinema goers are buying those tickets, and you simply won't get tickets so much to the other sort. So that, to me, was quite interesting, and I thought, isn't that interesting? That's not altruism, that's the way that the world is shaping the way modern cinema is going.
Yeah, actually, there's a question here which I think you're known as a strong supporter for young filmmakers. There are many people, especially not from financially secure backgrounds, who feel intimidated by the industry. Especially the actors' side feels like an exclusive club. the UK is an amazing source for great films and filmmakers, I mean, like yourself. But how do you think the situation can be
Improved.
It says approved, it means improved, and the industry made more accessible?
Well, I would say that the industry is more accessible today than it has ever been. So that's the first thing. The problem is not accessibility to the industry, in my view. The problem is not accessibility, the problem is stickability. I remember when I was on that Film Council committee, the statistics for first films are pretty good. Most people who've got a half-decent idea for a film and really have put their time in to get it to a place where it can be made, get a chance. But the drop-off then is really most marked. Lots and lots of filmmakers get one chance and then fall away. And the truth about filmmaking, like painting, is you get better with practice, like anything, making furniture, you name it. That's the problem. How do you... It's not getting in, it's staying in. Now, that's where you get to casualisation, which is the great problem in our industry. So now I'm talking film and television more broadly. Because when I joined the television industry, you got a contract, you got a 6-month contract, you were protected, there were unions. Now there are no unions, it's heavily casualised, and you will get short contracts, highly exploited if you're young. If you can deliver a certain sort of product and help deliver a certain sort of product, at reality television or strip scheduled drama or whatever, you can move fast and up and make money, which is what it's all about, sadly, in those industries. But it's not very good at protecting point of view because it's become heavily conformist. But there are always problems in any age. You've got to work with what you've got. Technology means it's possible to make films on noughpence. The industry is open. It's never been a better time to make films in Britain than today. Never, never, ever historically has it ever been better. Our country is... it's biddable. It is under... You know what I mean? You can see it, whether it's Brexit, whether it's, you know, Scotland, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Europe, whether it's the world. The energy is phenomenal. So you can't be deflected by the problems. What you have to do is concentrate on what it is that you want to say. That's the only guide in all activity, creative activity, is that. And when you're young, try to remember that finding that point of view, finding that voice, takes time. It took me, I would say, to my 40s to really feel, and I'd made a lot of television in a lot of places, and I'd made a lot of documentaries, I'd made a lot of drama, I'd made a couple of small films. I never felt I had found my voice, and I ended up... Two things brought it home to me. One was making a film that was not very good, I'll put it that euphemistically, and I was very unhappy with because I didn't control it, and I made many mistakes in the control of it, and I said to myself, I'm either going to give up or I'm going to control everything that I do, or I'm not doing it. And that gave me the steel that you have to have in filmmaking. You have to say it's my way or the highway, because you can do it if you write a novel because you're the only one who's pushing the typewriter keys, or if you're painting. But filmmaking is an industrial activity that involves resources, lots of other people. You know, it's an industrial process. So to exert control means that you have to demonstrate that you're always right, but that you're more likely to have the answers than anyone else. And then you have to have the technical ability to be able to deal with a crew that know much more about any specific, but they have to know that you know, right? And then lastly, you have to have the guiding power of your point of view, of what it is you want to say, that makes you a filmmaker as opposed to a shooter. And that takes time. It took me 20 years of working and the experience at the end of that 20 years when things had gone pretty well but without really clicking. Then it was followed by abject failure, and I ended up, if I could pinpoint a moment, I did a scene, a six-handed scene in the desert at night, and it featured a soldier whose name was Dinger. It was based on a story in the Gulf War, and I'd written this script, and the end of this scene, the soldier was dying of exposure, and his commanding officer said to him, "Don't go down on me now, Dinger." I'd written this line. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, till it was played in front of me when I realised that it was, what did this line mean? Don't go down on me, Dinger, not at a time like this in the desert. I haven't had a bath in a week. I don't know. But I realised that something was badly wrong. And I remember we broke at 3 in the morning for an hour, and I was next to a Humvee truck, and I banged my head against it like this, hard, fucking nearly concussed myself, because I realised that the films that I was writing were not the films that were coming out the other end. And the reason was because I was not bringing the whole piece together under the rubric of your point of view, and I was not being ruthless enough in the projection of that and the control of that, and it made me go, fuck it, I'm never ever going to compromise from here on in. And it, in a way, it...
What was the name of that film?
The bad one?
Yeah.
The Theory of Flight, sorry.
I want to just show another, it seems to have gone...
Not a clip from that, surely.
I'm not showing that one, I promise. I'm going to show,
I don't mind.
There's a series of clips I'm going to show of sort of action, and then going to ask if there are any questions in the audience, and then going to show my final favourite clip. Is this the clip one? Okay, we need to get rid of... How do we get the lights down? What's it doing? Just setting up.
The true story about that film was that the very first day there was a scene on a hillside. Can I talk while you're doing your thing? And there were 2 actors on a hillside playing some dialogue scene, I can't remember. And I was the guy who was shooting the film for me was a guy called Ivan Strasberg, who's a very brilliant cameraman, a close friend of mine from South Africa. And this was the very first shot of the very first day of this film. And it was a long lens shot with the 2 actors about quarter of a mile away.
Oh, sorry.
Hang on. And we turned over and shot the scene. And as Ivan was notorious for during takes talking, so he's like this, and I'm standing hunched over him. Very first shot of the film, and as we start rolling, he goes, "Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, this is fucking terrible. Oh, we are absolutely fucked on this film." And that was when I knew that we were not going to be going well. And it was.
Here we go. You see it, so they make it all over that.
Huh?
Have you no trouble? There's a piece on my too.
Report you got some trouble. You want to be very careful, already? Right. If there's any trouble, surely there's any talk about that. We'll clear time out. Please don't watch your civil
We're
rights.
going to have these guys. I want to see all of them in the bag.
We're going to have to be tough today, man.
If the shooting starts, we're going to shoot back plenty of rounds.
Of course, of course. The hair from the march organizing earlier today. They're extraordinary organization. Simply being shot at, that's on there. The march, someone else is dead. The movement's dead.
Very good one. Yeah, actually, conducive Hanging out, enjoying your day. Hey, we're more than at ease.
Hey, this is Sandy in the back. Can you call ground and see if we can get some more pillows and blankets?
Casinos reporting a light civil aircraft suggesting the World Trade Center.
Man, that's a lot of smoke. We got another hijack. 175 dropped this transponder. We got a possible hijack. Weapons. Scramble those fighters in over Manhattan. Copy that.
We've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet and I'm going very fast. The seatbelt sign off and you are safe to move back to the cabin.
Descending rapid. This aircraft is going down. No, right now.
Here's one of the twos for you.
No, there he is. There he is right there. Oh, look at that.
Oh my gosh.
We have a plane headed toward the Capitol.
What the hell is wrong out there?
And we engage, sir.
Someone started all this. And I'm gonna find him.
This is Jason Brewer, toughest target that you've ever tracked. He's really good at staying alive, and trying to kill him and failing just pisses him off. Hello, Andy.
I hear you're still looking for me.
Born?
I remember everything.
This is Messi, Alabama.
We are an unarmed freighter. We have two skiffs approaching with armed intruders.
Potential piracy situation.
Take a hold of this. This is now a real world situation.
What is his greatest hits or something?
I know who I am.
When we are finished with you, you will no longer be yourself.
I remember everything.
Remembering everything doesn't mean you know everything.
Tell me.
It's just been hacked. Could be worse than snubbing.
Facial recognition got hit.
Jesus Christ, that's Jason Bourne.
Why would it come back now? People are safer because of what you did.
You're never gonna find any peace.
Not until you admit to yourself who you really are.
Now that Vegas car chase, that was fun. Thank you.
Okay, so I think it'd be really nice if that anybody would like to ask a question before I do the final leaving end of Q&A piece. Anyone got a question? Yes, I'm going to walk around. I saw you first.
I just want to know how closely you direct the editors. Like, what's your relationship with the editors?
Chris Rouse, who's cut all my films from many years back, very closely. We probably speak sort of 4 times a day, maybe. It's a symbiotic process, you know. It's very important that he looks at what I've shot with a dispassionate eye, and sometimes he'll go in a different direction to where I think he's going to go. Then we'll talk about it. we'll get back on the right track. No, I'm joking. He and I both share some principles about filmmaking, I think, and some instincts about the world. For any director, I think the cutting room it's your final trench from which you're going to fight to the death for the film. You know, it's the place. Once it's out there, it's you know, off your hands. It's a very, very close relationship. I mean, the relationships that you have when you're a director are very close with your actors, particularly with your leading actor, male or female, because you're going to chart the whole throw of a film. With a DOP, obviously, because you're gathering the images with your sound crew, but with the editor is the only other character, really, other than your leading actor, that you're going to chart, and the producer maybe, that you're going to chart the journey of the film, and that's why it's such a close creative relationship. And together you're going to explore, particularly for me, the musicality, you know, whether your builds are the right type, and whether your shaping of the film as an experience is going in the right way. So that all comes together really in the editing room.
Next question.
Great job though. Great world to go into, editing. Really, really interesting.
Hi, in Captain Phillips, the root cause of piracy was largely ignored. So $3,000 million are stolen from Somali waters every year, and I was just wanting to ask why the root cause of piracy in Somalia was largely ignored in the film, and in relation to what you were saying about truth. Yeah.
Well, I would not agree with that, obviously. I think if we were to watch the film together, I think that the film begins with a very clear depiction of the root causes of piracy and the systems that lead these young men to do what they do. And the issue that you raised about the overfishing of Somalian waters, that's explicitly referred to 3 or 4 times, and most importantly in the final scene between Phillips and Muse, the pirate. I mean, they specifically discuss exactly that issue. I just don't think that's true, with respect. And I think you'd find it hard to watch that film with me now and still hold that opinion, you know. I think. Okay.
Maybe one more question. And then
you mentioned you made a film about the murder of Stephen Lawrence back in the 90s, so I was wondering what event, sort of microcosmic event in recent British history, do you think has the most to say about the state of this country today?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and one I do ask myself. I mean, I think that obviously Brexit is the most important, momentous event of, well, my life, but certainly yours, that's for sure. I mean, that's going to mark all your futures for the rest of your lives. In a way, it's a dry subject, but I think, and I'm answering the question, I'm not saying, by the way, that this is a film that I want to make. I'm trying to answer your question. It's just like, what event jumps out at you, you go, Christ, that really speaks to where we are. I would say it was the murder of Joe Cox, because it seemed to me to be speak to how our country is no longer what it was up until that moment. It symbolised something that was occurring, and it symbolised a value system that was in conflict with a different value system, and it spoke to the fact that the action could not, I don't believe, have occurred in a vacuum, and it did not. It occurred because of a rhetoric that was put out there, because of an exploitation of fear and hatred by people who should know better. And in the end, there was an inevitability about something like that, not that particular act, because in the end, all acts are the acts of the perpetrators. But these things do not occur in a vacuum, and that goes to the heart of a swirling mass of hatred and distrust that's been accumulating for quite some years, and it burst out, and you saw it right there when that man said, "Britain first, always Britain first," which I think was what he said. And then we get a straight line to Donald Trump saying, "America first." Sorry, America first. America first. This is about a world that people are frightened is slipping away from them, and they're prepared to fight for it and menace those of us who disagree with them. That's the truth of it. And how we deal with that, God knows, but that's the issue.
I'm going to now, one of the things that I always respond to in your work, particularly in certain parts, is there's a kind of euphoria about them. And I'm going to play this one, because I think this is one of my favourite. I like the first one.
It's got to be fun. Movies.
Now, if I can get this to work, I have to press this on. Oh, what's going on, James? It says, please, Oh.
How many of you in this room, presuming most of you are at Slade School, yeah?
Yeah.
How many of you are thinking of going into the film and television industries, would you say? Want to? Okay. That's less than I would have thought. How many of the rest of you who aren't know what you're going to do, or think that you know what you want to do, or don't yet know? Do know. How many of you do know what you want to do?
Does anyone want to answer that? Before I play the... Anyone? Sorry?
Yeah. No, I'm interested. So basically, I'm surprised that there's not...
over here.
I'm surprised that there's not more of you. I would have said that...
Paint.
Paint.
Very good answer.
Good. Right.
Okay, here we go. Okay.
The two aren't dissimilar, is the truth of it.
CIA Deputy Director Noah Bose, the program's operational chief. Meanwhile, mystery surrounds the fate of David Webb, also known as Jason Bourne, source behind...
Look at her smile in a minute.
It's been reported that Webb was shot and fell from a Manhattan rooftop into the East River 10 stories below. However, after a 3-day search, Webb's body has yet to be found.
Not again.
We managed to keep you a lot longer than 45 minutes. It's
very
great.
Good. It's lovely.
Thank you very much. Very much.
Lovely to meet you all. Thank you.